If I hadn't ripped that gate off with my Jeep that night, Pinewood Estates would be ashes right now. And guess who put the padlock that nearly ended it all? My rule-obsessed neighbor, Tiffany. That's right, Tiffany. The woman who thinks a rusty gate is a threat to the neighborhood's elegance. Stick with me, because this story has padlocks, fires, and an ending you won't believe. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Pinewood Estates, a quiet subdivision where the biggest crises were usually someone forgetting to mow their lawn, or at most, Mrs. Jenkins complaining that the neighbor's plastic flamingos were out of alignment. Me, Ethan Carter. I was in the backyard fixing the roof of my chicken coop, a mission involving a hammer, nails, and a heroically disproportionate amount of sweat for such a simple task. My dog Maverick, a mutt with boundless energy and a canine sense of justice, was barking at squirrels as if he were the street's sheriff, or at least the self-proclaimed guardian of the walnut trees. The sun was high, painting the sky a lazy blue, and the coffee in my mug still steamed comfortingly, its aroma mingling with the scent of freshly cut wood. That's when I saw her. Tiffany, the queen of petitions and HOA meetings nobody asked for. She was crossing the street with determined strides, as if marching into a war only she knew existed. She wore oversized sunglasses that screamed, "I'm mysterious, but I might also be hiding dark circles," and carried a clipboard like it was an Olympic trophy, or maybe a secret weapon. Her blonde hair bounced with every step, and you could feel the drama coming before she even opened her mouth. I didn't pay much attention at first, figuring it was just another one of her crusades for a better neighborhood. After all, last week she'd tried to convince everyone to paint their mailboxes yellow to add more life. But then she stopped right at my gate, the side one almost invisible behind the overgrown hedge I never trim, because, well, who has time for that, and stared at me like I was the next item on her agenda. Maverick stopped barking at the squirrels and turned his snout toward her as if to say, "This one's your problem, Ethan." She reached into her bag, one of those designer purses that look small but mysteriously hold the world, and pulled out a shiny brand new padlock, the kind you'd use to secure pirate treasure. Click. She locked my gate like she was sealing a vault at the Federal Reserve, the sound echoing through the quiet courtyard like a starting gunshot. I dropped the hammer on the ground and ran over, still holding the screwdriver, its handle warm against my sweaty palm. Maverick trotted behind me, ears perked, ready to watch the show. "Tiffany, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady so I didn't sound like a lunatic, or worse, like someone about to become the next HOA meeting meme. She turned her head slowly, almost in slow motion, and peered at me over her sunglasses, like a soap opera villain sizing up the protagonist before the final blow. "Ethan," she began with that tone that mixed authority and pity, "this gate is an affront to the aesthetics of Pinewood Estates. Rule 22C of the bylaws, in case you haven't read it, secondary entrances must be secure and uniform." I did everyone a favor. The way she said everyone made it sound like the whole neighborhood was silently judging me, or at least rooting for her to win this fight. I blinked, dazed, feeling the sun's heat hit the back of my neck harder. "This gate isn't decoration, Tiffany. It's an emergency access to the city's water valve. You know, for things like keeping the neighborhood from turning into a giant swimming pool." She gave me a condescending smile, the kind that says, "Poor thing, you don't understand how the world works." She tucked the clipboard under her arm and replied, without even blinking, "If it were that important, the county would have told me. I'm the official safety committee representative, Ethan. They keep me informed." She paused, as if expecting applause, then added, "Besides, this padlock is matte. It matches the hedge." Maverick let out a short bark, almost like he was laughing at the situation, and I caught myself wondering if it was worth arguing with someone who thinks aesthetics trump plumbing. But standing there, with the screwdriver in hand and my coffee going cold in the mug, I knew this ordinary Tuesday was about to turn into anything but peaceful. I could have ripped the padlock off right then. I had bolt cutters in the shed, tossed on top of a toolbox I swear I'll organize someday. One quick snip and done. Problem solved. But you know how it is. I looked at Tiffany with that clipboard, and that air of having just saved the world, and I thought, she'll give up on this nonsense on her own. No one's that stubborn. My mistake. A colossal mistake, the kind you look back on and think, how was I so naive? Because what I didn't know, or rather what I underestimated, was that stupid padlock, gleaming there like a tacky trophy, was about to become the spark of a crisis that nearly swallowed Pinewood Estates whole. And to think I used to believe the biggest drama around here was the day the mailman delivered the neighbor's newspaper to the wrong house. See, that gate wasn't just a crooked, faded piece of metal. It wasn't just a side entrance I used as a shortcut to the backyard, or to let Maverick chase shadows. Beneath it, hidden under a rusty cover that looked older than the subdivision itself, was the backup water valve, a poorly kept secret that only someone who deals with plumbing or reads boring county manuals would know about. It had been installed after a grumpy tornado blew through in 2019 like an unwelcome guest, knocking out half the region's water system and leaving us dry for 2 weeks. I know this because I helped design the system for the county. Not a certified engineer, but I can sketch a plan and wield a wrench better than most. It was meant to be a simple fix, an emergency valve to cut or release the flow if the main system failed again. Functional, discreet, almost invisible. Almost Tiffany, she had no clue. To her it was just an ugly gate that didn't match the Pinewood standard. While I tried to explain, she was already scribbling something on her clipboard, probably plotting the next absurd rule. Like forcing everyone to use identical floral curtains. Maverick kept looking at me, head tilted as if saying, "You're letting this slide, boss?" And me, still holding the screwdriver, I started feeling a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the padlock. It was what lay behind it. Or rather, beneath it. That was about to turn this Tuesday into a nightmare I never imagined I'd be narrating. The day passed quietly, at least by Pinewood Estates standards, meaning no major scandals beyond the usual. Except, of course, for Tiffany, who decided to escalate the situation to a level of theatrics not even the HOA committee deserved. She returned with a beach chair, one of those green and white striped ones you see in 80s summer movies with families laughing and eating watermelon, and set up guard right in front of my locked gate. She unfolded the chair with a flourish, as if she were a queen installing her throne, and sat there, majestic, holding a glass of organic lemonade. The sun-colored liquid seemed to glow as she took slow sips, staring down anyone who dared pass by with a mix of disdain and superiority. The poor mailman showed up on his bike with a stack of envelopes. She pointed him to another street with a curt gesture, as if he were an intruder. A neighbor walking his dog, old Mr. Thompson with his lazy basset hound, strolled nearby. She jotted something on her clipboard, frowning like a detective in a crime drama. I watched it all from the porch, swaying in the hammock with Maverick sprawled at my feet, amused by the circus she'd set up. The sun climbed higher in the sky, relentless, and the heat started to press in, the thermometer hitting about 38°C, making the air shimmer above the asphalt. My shirt was already sticking to my back, and the coffee in my mug had turned into a lukewarm, forgettable liquid. Meanwhile, the local news on the living room TV started getting serious, talking about fire warnings due to a weeks-long drought. The anchor, with that slightly alarmist tone they love, mentioned critical conditions and strong winds. I thought about calling the fire department, explaining the valve, the padlock, Tiffany, but I figured it was overkill. After all, who'd imagined that a lightning bolt, a single measly lightning bolt, would strike 8 kilometers away in a patch of dry brush and turn the night into a disaster movie inferno? Maverick lifted his head, sniffing the air as if he sensed something, while I still chuckled at Tiffany adjusting her sunglasses and scribbling another note. The sky was clear. The day seemed just hot and dull. But deep down, way deep down, I felt a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was Maverick's low growl. Or maybe it was the fact that, while Tiffany sipped her organic lemonade, fate was setting up a show no one in Pinewood would forget anytime soon. By 10 p.m., the sky turned into a nightmare canvas, a sickly orange like someone had spilled fluorescent paint over the stars. I looked out the living room window, my heart racing before I even understood what I was seeing. On the horizon, to the east, the glow of flames climbed the hill like a ravenous wave, licking at the dry trees and spitting black smoke into the air. The wind blew hard, howling between the houses, pushing the fire straight toward Pinewood Estates like an unwelcome guest who wouldn't take no for an answer. I grabbed my phone with shaky hands and opened the fire map app. A blinking, red line advanced fast, a cruel scribble that seemed to mock our peace. Maverick barked from the porch, tail tucked, smelling the smoke before I could. Minutes later, sirens pierced the silence, a sharp, urgent sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Fire trucks roared down the main road, their red and white, lights flashing like angry eyes in the dark. I knew where they were headed. My gate, that insignificant piece of metal that was now the difference between chaos and salvation. I shoved my boots on without even tying the laces, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and ran out, my heart pounding like an out-of-control drum. In my head, I pictured the firefighters arriving with a spare key, bolt cutters, something, to open that damn gate and access the valve. They had to know, right? The county had maps, plans, someone must have warned them. But when I got there panting and with the flashlight shaking in my hand, guess who was still there? Tiffany. Yes, Tiffany, now in floral pajamas, a ridiculously cheerful set with Daisy. Prints that seemed to mock the situation. She was still sitting in her beach chair, the sunglasses swapped for reading glasses perched on her nose, like a librarian guarding a burning kingdom. The clipboard was still in her lap, and she held a pen like a spear, staring at the street with the same determination as before. The glow of the flames reflected on her face, casting an almost supernatural hue over the scene, while the wind whipped her blonde hair back like a battle flag. "Tiffany, get out of there," I shouted, my voice hoarse against the wail of sirens and the distant roar of the fire. She didn't budge, just looked up at me and said, calm as if commenting on the weather, "Ethan, I'm not letting anyone violate HOA rules. This is my responsibility." And there, with the heat starting to sear my skin and the smell of smoke filling my lungs, I realized the real fire wasn't just the one coming down the hill, it was the stubbornness of the woman sitting in front of me. A firefighter leapt from the truck like he'd been spat out the door, his face sweaty and tense, the visor of his helmet reflecting the orange of the flames already licking the hilltop. "We need the valve now," he yelled, his voice cutting through the air like an extra siren as he shook the padlock with gloved hands. The metal jingled, helpless, and the sound seemed to mock his urgency. Tiffany didn't move. She stayed, planted in her beach chair like a stubborn statue, her floral pajamas fluttering in the hot wind. "This is Pinewood Estates property," she said, with the maddening calm of someone reading board game rules. "I'll only open it with council authorization." The firefighter's face turned red. I couldn't tell if it was from anger or the heat rippling the air around us. "Ma'am, that valve is a state resource. You're obstructing an emergency." He pointed at the flaming sky as if she needed visual proof, but Tiffany just shrugged, adjusting her reading glasses. "Where's the paperwork?" she asked like she was requesting a pizza delivery receipt. I couldn't take it. The blood rushed to my head, the sound of sirens and the distant crackling of the fire pushing me to the edge. "Paperwork? She wants paperwork at a time like this?" I muttered to myself, already sprinting to my Jeep, parked in the driveway. The old metal beast, a '98 Cherokee that's seen better days, growled to life when I turned the key. I grabbed a rusty chain I used to haul fallen logs in the yard, tied one end to the tow hitch and the other to the padlock, all while Tiffany stared at me like I was a barbarian storming her castle. I floored the gas, the engine roared like a bear woken from sleep, and crack! The gate flew open with a snap that echoed down the street. The padlock spun through the air like a coin tossed to chance, and the hedge swayed as if applauding. Tiffany leapt from her chair, her floral pajamas flapping dramatically, and shouted something about vandalism and exorbitant fines. But the firefighters didn't even glance at her. They were already rushing past me in an awkward sprint, hoses unfurling in their hands, heavy boots pounding the ground as they ran to the rusty valve cover. Their chief, the same one who'd yelled at Tiffany, gave me a quick nod. Half thanks, half we don't have time for this, before crouching down and turning the valve with a wrench that looked straight out of an action movie. Water gushed from some hidden pipe, a deep gurgling sound that was almost a relief in itself. Maverick barked, excited, as if he'd helped with the plan, while I stood there, panting, the Jeep still rumbling behind me, the smell of burnt rubber, mixing with smoke. Tiffany, now standing with her clipboard in hand, looked like a dethroned queen, but I knew this battle was far from over, at least for her. The fire was contained in 3 hours, a Herculean effort by the firefighters who battled the wind and flames like gladiators in a blazing arena. Hoses sprayed water in silver arcs beneath the orange sky, and the roar of the fire gradually gave way to the wet hiss of scorched earth. But not everything survived the night. A house on the edge of the subdivision, the Hendersons, turned to ashes before the trucks could reach it. The flames devoured the wooden roof and the expensive furniture Mrs. Henderson loved showing off at meetings, leaving only a blackened, smoking skeleton as a memento. Was it the delay's fault? Maybe. Those precious minutes lost in the tug-of-war over the padlock made a difference. Tiffany's fault? Absolutely. If she hadn't turned an emergency valve into a pedestal for her ego, the firefighters might have had time to save more than just the main street. The next day, the sun rose timidly, filtered through a haze of smoke. Still lingering over Pinewood Estates, the air smelled of charcoal and defeat, but I wasn't about to let it slide. I took the broken padlock, that twisted little piece of metal that nearly cost the neighborhood, and hung it on my porch with a crooked nail. Next to it, I tied a wooden sign I had in the shed, scrawling in big black marker letters. Tiffany's Ego Relic. Maverick wagged his tail, approving the jab, while I sipped fresh coffee, watching the street with a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. It was a trophy, a warning, a joke, and, who knows, maybe an invitation to the next fight. But the story didn't end there, not by a long shot. Pinewood Estates, that quiet subdivision where the biggest crime was an unkempt lawn, turned into a battlefield overnight. On one side, the furious neighbors, the Hendersons, mourning their lost home, Mr. Thompson, waving his cane and yelling about criminal negligence, and even the mailman, who now avoided the street out of fear of Tiffany. On the other, Tiffany and her one-woman army, still clinging to her clipboard like it was a holy shield, swearing she'd protected community standards. And me? I was right in the middle, with my Jeep, my dog, and a sign that had already become the talk of the day. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, the county wanting explanations, the firefighters requesting statements, and the HOA scheduling an emergency meeting that promised to be a circus. As the coffee cooled in my mug, I knew that stupid Tuesday had lit a match that would keep burning for a long time. The next morning, I pushed open the door to Daisy's diner with my shoulder, the bell above the entrance jingling like a warning that I wouldn't go unnoticed. I just wanted a coffee to wake up after a restless night, but the moment I stepped onto the worn linoleum, I felt every eye on me. The clatter of forks on plates and the hum of idle chatter stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence, the kind where you can hear the ceiling fan buzzing. At the counter, an old man in a battered cap turned his neck slowly, staring at me over a cup of black coffee. "You the gate guy?" he asked, his gravelly voice carrying a tone that could have been curiosity or accusation. I couldn't tell. I nodded shortly, a bit awkwardly, holding my breath to see if I'd get a scolding or applause. The folks at Daisy's weren't exactly subtle. Before the old man could go on, a woman approached, arms crossed, her face etched with dark circles that told a heavy story. "My name's Linda," she said, stopping a few steps from me. "My sister lost her house yesterday, the Hendersons from the East Edge. If it weren't for that lunatic Tiffany, the firefighters would have made it in time." Her voice shook with anger, but her eyes glinted with something like gratitude, as if I were an unlikely hero in this mess. I opened my mouth to reply, maybe, to say I'd done nothing more than floor the Jeep's gas pedal, but I was cut off by the sound of the door slamming again. The sheriff walked in, his leather belt creaking and boots echoing on the floor, a crumpled roll of paper in his hand. Without ceremony, he tossed it into the trash can by the counter, the thud turning every head. "Tiffany tried filing a complaint against you," he said, looking straight at me as he adjusted his hat. "Destruction of HOA property according to her." I threw it out. "She's crazy if she thinks that'll stick after what happened yesterday." He gave a half smile, almost like he was enjoying the absurdity of it all, and crossed his arms. The silence in the diner broke. The old man at the counter let out a dry laugh. Linda shook her head like she couldn't believe the gall, and the waitress behind the counter Daisy herself slid a mug of coffee my way without me even asking. "On the house," she muttered, winking. I took the coffee, the mug's heat burning my hands, and felt the weight of what Pinewood had become. I wasn't just Ethan from the chicken coop anymore. I was the gate guy, caught in the eye of a hurricane Tiffany had helped create, and one she clearly wasn't about to let go of easily. I laughed at the sheriff's comment, a short chuckle that came out more like a sigh of disbelief, but relief. Was a fleeting visitor. It barely sat down before getting up and leaving. While I sipped the free coffee at Daisy's, Linda pulled me aside and unloaded what I didn't know. Tiffany hadn't just locked my gate on a last-minute whim. She'd been terrorizing Pinewood Estates for months, a lone crusade against anything. That didn't fit her vision of perfection. Fines for non-standard grills. Old Thompson nearly had a fit when he got one for the rusty barbecue he'd been using since the 90s. Complaints about bikes parked in driveways. The Ortiz family had to hide their kids' bikes in the basement to dodge her notices. Even a 10-year-old kid, little Joey from the corner, got an official warning for hanging a wind chime in his yard. Excessive noise, according to Tiffany's sacred clipboard. The fire wasn't just an accident amplified by her stubbornness. It was the final straw in a bucket that had been overflowing for a long time. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was cleaning the chicken coop. Councilman Jackson, a guy with a deep voice who always sounded like he was chewing on something invisible. "Ethan, you know what that gate means," he said, cutting straight to the chase. "We need you at the emergency town council meeting tonight, 6 o'clock. Come prepared to set the record straight." I hung up, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. I rushed to the makeshift office in the attic, grabbed an old folder stuffed with dusty documents, contracts from 2019 signed with the county, hand-drawn water system maps, reports proving in black and white that gate E12 was critical access to the backup valve. I tossed it all onto the Jeep's passenger seat and drove to City Hall, my stomach churning like I was about to face a courtroom. The City Hall room was packed, a sea of neighbors squeezed into folding chairs and crammed in the aisle, the air thick with the smell of sweat and reheated coffee. Mr. Thompson was there, cane in hand, muttering curses. Linda and the Hendersons sat in the front row, their eyes red from sleeplessness. And Tiffany? She was front and center, wearing an impeccable beige pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, smiling like she was the wronged victim of a conspiracy. She looked like a lawyer ready to plead her innocence in a TV drama. The mayor, a bald guy with crooked glasses, banged his gavel on the table and opened the meeting with a weary sigh. "Can someone explain what happened at gate E12 yesterday? We need answers." Tiffany shot her hand up so fast she nearly knocked the clipboard off her lap. "I believed it was an aesthetic safety issue," she began, her voice steady and rehearsed, like she'd spent the night practicing in front of a mirror. "The gate was misaligned, unpainted, an affront to HOA regulations. I was never informed of any emergency use, the county didn't notify me, and I'm the official safety committee representative." She crossed her arms, her smile widening. Slightly, as if expecting applause for her dedication to the rules. The silence in the room turned into an irritated murmur, and I felt heat rising up my neck. That folder in my hand felt like it weighed a ton, and I knew it was time to lay the facts on the table before her beige suit convinced anyone. A neighbor in the crowd lost his patience and shouted, his voice slicing through the stuffy air, "You locked the firefighters out, you nutcase!" The murmurs swelled into a roar, but Tiffany didn't flinch. She held that steady gaze, as if the chaos around her was just an annoying detail. "If it were that vital," she shot back, her tone solid as concrete, "the county would have flagged it. I follow the rules." That was my cue. I stood up, the faux leather folder in my hand like a loaded weapon. "The county did flag it, Tiffany," I said, loud enough to hush the buzz. "In 2019, Pinewood Estates signed an agreement to keep that access clear. It's all here. Emails with the chief engineer, council meeting minutes, even the receipt for the federal grant that paid for the valve's installation." I handed the stack of papers to the mayor, who took them with hesitant hands, like I'd just passed him a lit stick of dynamite. He handed them off to the aide beside him, his crooked glasses slipping down his sweaty nose. Tiffany went pale, her beige suit suddenly looking too big for her frame. But she wasn't going down without a fight. That doesn't justify vandalism, she snapped, jabbing an accusing finger at me like I'd burned the neighborhood down instead of saving it. The mayor raised a hand, his gavel trembling in the air. Enough, he cut in, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. A house burned. Tiffany, a family lost everything. We'll investigate the HOA's liability in this, and that's final. The room erupted in applause, shouts, and whistles, Mr. Thompson banging his cane on the floor like a war drum. I thought Tiffany might back off, maybe swallow her pride and slip out quietly. I underestimated her, and badly. The next day the sun had barely risen when I opened my mailbox and nearly jumped at what I found. 4 white envelopes from Pinewood Estates, each thicker than the last. I tore open the first, a $500 fine for damage to collective property. The second, an order to appear at a disciplinary hearing in 3 days. The third, a charge of improper vehicle use because of the Jeep. The fourth was just a letter full of jargon, but the message was clear. They were blaming me for saving the neighborhood. I stood there on the porch, the broken padlock swinging on the Kais sign in the breeze, and felt anger rising like bile. I grabbed my phone and called Ryan, a lawyer who owed me a favor since I installed a septic tank for him in a downpour back in 2022. An hour later, we were in his office, a cluttered cubicle smelling of stale coffee with papers scattered across the desk. Ryan read the documents, laughing out loud as he flipped through them. Tiffany's citing rules from 1985 that were repealed 2 decades ago, he said, shaking his head. That 2019 agreement you brought. Bulletproof, Ethan, and check this out. He pulled up a state map on his laptop. My gate marked with a bright red dot. It's on federal record as critical infrastructure. Locking it? That's a serious violation, emergency obstruction crime. I grinned, feeling the tide turn. So we sue? Ryan shook his head, his eyes glinting with a better idea. No defense. We go on the attack. Things escalated fast. Ryan pulled some strings to get internal HOA council emails, and there was Tiffany, in bold black letters. He won't prove a thing. We'll fine him until he caves. We sent the whole package to the county and the state fire department, complete with copies of the 2019 agreement and the federal map. That night, as I tossed a ball to Maverick in the backyard, someone pounded on my door hard. It was Tiffany. No clipboard, no pantsuit, just a stack of papers in her hand and a venomous glare that could melt steel. You're playing with fire, Ethan, she hissed, shoving a summons my way. Here's your council subpoena. I grabbed the paper, skimmed the title, more accusations, more fines, and tossed it back at her chest. See you Thursday. Tiffany, I replied, calm as the eye of a hurricane. The county wants a word with you too, and they're not asking permission. She spun on her heels and stormed off, but I knew. The match she'd lit was coming back to burn her hands. The next morning, I was on the porch with Maverick, tossing him a rubber bone while sipping my first coffee of the day, when I saw 2 county inspectors walking up the street. They stopped at Tiffany's door, their heavy boots echoing on the concrete. She answered in a bathrobe, a hot pink one that screamed, "Don't judge me," and her face crumpled like a house of cards as they handed her an official notice, one of those yellow envelopes nobody wants to get. One of the inspectors pointed at gate E12, gesturing with a clipboard, and I could almost read his lips. Immediate release order. Tiffany stood there, frozen, the robe fluttering in the breeze, and for a second I thought it was the end of the line for her, that she'd finally throw in the towel. Sweet delusion. Tiffany wasn't the type to back down. She was the type to double down until the deck ran out. Hours later, my phone buzzed with an email from Pinewood Estates. Official sender, council seal and all. I opened it and nearly dropped my coffee. They wanted to suspend the Gate E12 access agreement, citing pending legal review and compliance. Evaluation needs. It was absurd. A blatant attempt to rewrite history and pretend the fire never happened because of them. I bolted inside, called Ryan, and threw the phone on speaker as he picked up. They're trying to cover their tracks. Ryan, suspend the gate agreement. On the other end, I heard him curse under his breath, a swear that echoed through his cluttered office. Sons of bitches, he muttered, then took a deep breath. We'll shut this down before it hits a judge's desk. The county was already on it. The chief inspector, a guy named Morales I'd met in 2019 during the valve installation, called Ryan that afternoon. He called Tiffany's move a blatant defiance of state authority and said he'd escalated the case to the State Infrastructure Department. "No one messes with a federal critical point and walks away clean," he assured, his voice dripping with disdain. But the killing blow didn't come from the authorities. It came from the media. By noon, news vans started parking on the street like vultures circling a carcass. Channel 7 with its gaudy logo, Channel 13 with a reporter too young for the tie he wore, even a local radio station with a mic that looked straight out of the 70s. Someone, I'd bet on Mr. Thompson, that vengeful old man, leaked the council's internal emails to the local paper, and the headline blew up like gasoline on a fire. HOA rep locks out emergency access. Nearly burns down entire neighborhood. Reporters swarmed Tiffany's house, cameras aimed like weapons, while she scrambled to shut her curtains in a panic. One of them knocked on my door, mic in hand, asking, "Ethan Carter, you're the hero who opened the gate. What do you think of this whole mess?" I gave a crooked smile. I just wanted to fix my chicken coop. Asked Tiffany why she thought a padlock was worth more than the neighborhood. The line turned to gold on TV. They replayed it on the 6 o'clock news, my name in white letters across the screen. Meanwhile, Ryan called me laughing. The state's issuing a court order to void the suspension. And there's more. The fire department opened an obstruction inquiry against her. "Tiffany's sinking, Ethan, and you didn't even have to get your hands dirty." I looked out the window, watching the news van lights reflect off the broken padlock hanging on the porch. Maverick barked at a reporter who got too close to the yard, and I thought Pinewood Estates would never be the same. And for the first time in days, that felt like good news. By midday, Tiffany fired back. She went live on Instagram like she was starring in a perfume ad. A flawless backdrop with a meticulously trimmed garden, red roses in focus, and a glass of white wine in hand. She wore white linen, light makeup, and an air of fake innocence. "I've been slandered by a sensationalist media," she began, her voice measured, almost rehearsed. "I only wanted to protect Pinewood Estates' harmony. No one told me. That gate was essential." Harmony? I nearly spat out my soda. She locked the firefighters out of a blaze, and now she was posing as a victim bathed in midday sunlight. The video was a laser-aimed shot in the foot. It poured pure gasoline on the social fire already raging through the neighborhood. In WhatsApp groups and the video's comment section, neighbors who'd once been timid lost their fear of speaking up. Stories started popping up like popcorn. "She fined my 5-year-old for leaving a toy car on the sidewalk." My fence was under review for 8 months because, according to her, it wasn't visually harmonious. She called me an aesthetic threat because I painted my door sky blue. The dam broke when Sarah Miller, one of the most beloved residents, and the mastermind behind the block's best cookies, launched an online petition to remove Tiffany from the council. In under 8 hours, it had 300 signatures. That was nearly half of Pinewood, and it was just the beginning. Meanwhile, on the official side of things, the state fire department stepped into the ring. They called a press conference. The chief, in a pristine uniform and a stern expression, took the podium with the authority of someone used to putting out more than just fires. "Obstructing valve E12 is a severe violation of emergency regulations," he declared. "We're launching a formal investigation into potential negligence by Pinewood Estates administration during last week's fire." Behind him, a screen displayed an enlarged map of the neighborhood. A red arrow, anything but subtle, pointed straight to Tiffany's backyard. The crowd, journalists, firefighters, and even a few undercover neighbors, burst into applause. The next morning, the HOA backpedaled, still trying to save face. An official notice arrived via email, dripping with passive-aggressive language, like a kid's apology for not returning a toy. Following the receipt of new information, we've decided to suspend the review of Gate E12 access until further notice. It was a clear retreat, a sign of defeat, but I wasn't even close to satisfied. With Ryan, my favorite nerdy neighbor and former HOA member, we spent the night digging through Pinewood Estates bylaws like two B-movie detectives. That's when we struck gold. A a forgotten 1998 clause stating that any resident could call an emergency vote to remove a council member for harm to community safety. It was pure gold. Over the next 2 days, I went door to door, knocking on houses, explaining the case with printouts, videos, and even dramatic backyard reenactments. In 48 hours, we had 150 signatures, the exact number needed to force an official vote. Tiffany was about to feel the weight of neighborhood democracy on her back, the cherry on top. Another buried rule, deep in the bylaws, stated in plain text, that anyone obstructing emergency services would be permanently banned from holding council positions. Tiffany, the queen of rules, never bothered to read the ones that actually mattered. On Saturday, the meeting took place in the community hall, the spot usually reserved for debates about tree trimming and fence heights. But that day, it felt like a courtroom. I brought everything: the documents, the broken padlock as physical evidence of the crime, and a printed copy of her Instagram video, complete with flowers and wine glass in the background. The room was packed. Neighbors from every corner, uniformed firefighters, even a local reporter with a camera too big for the small space. I laid it all out, from the locked gate to the thick smoke, from fines for non-standard decorations to the panic of being trapped. I didn't need to exaggerate or make anything up. The facts were absurd enough on their own. The vote was a slaughter. Tiffany lost 87-3. The 3 votes in her favor came from loyal friends who looked more uncomfortable than convinced. She left in silence, her clipboard dangling in her hand like an out-of-place accessory. Blank face, no tears, no drama. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the rest of me was already focused on the next step, making sure this never happened again. The following week, Pinewood breathed. Literally. The vibe in the neighborhood shifted. The council appointed Greg Dawson as interim president, a calm ex-submariner with the demeanor of someone who fixes problems before they turn into crises. No inflated egos or petty aesthetic gripes. When he called me to the gate a few days later, I went with my guard up. But there it was, the gate, now fitted with a digital system tied to a remote signal. Fast, secure, no room for makeshift padlocks. Greg handed me an official agreement. The HOA was dropping all fines, covering the repair costs for my gate, and issuing a formal apology to the county. "Tiffany drained our credibility," he said. "This is the least we can do." But the best moment was still to come. The next week, the firefighters held an emergency drill in the neighborhood. Pinewood turned into a movie set. Red trucks, sirens, paramedics running, rehearsed, kids in toy helmets, even a free ice cream cart. They tested the new gate. It opened in 3 seconds. A firefighter approached me with a grin and handed me a small gold plaque, Pinewood Protector. They laughed, I laughed, and it was at that moment I saw her. Tiffany. Wide-brimmed hat, dark sunglasses, expression unreadable, standing in the middle of the crowd, watching everything without a word. When the drill ended, she turned her back and vanished between the parked cars. I thought that was the end, but fate had one last card to play. A week later, I got a letter from the HOA, an invitation. "You've been nominated as a community safety consultant." I laughed. After all that, they wanted me on the team now? I thought it over, weighed it and accepted. Not out of pride, but because it was the surest way to stop a new Tiffany from rising. At the first meeting, Greg led with calm. We updated protocols, approved fire-resistant gardens for the common areas. No debates about the color of streetlights or the length of curtains, just practical measures, things that mattered. Neighbors thanked me afterward, and that's when I realized Pinewood was awake. A month after the fire, the county held an event in the park to honor the first responders. It was simple. Wooden stage, folding chairs, the smell of popcorn in the air. They called my name. I stepped up, nothing prepared. I looked at the people, whole families who'd nearly lost their homes, faces now relieved, bound by something bigger than regulations. I took a deep breath and said only, "A padlock can block help. A voice can break it. Speak loud even if you're the first." Applause. Genuine. I stepped off the stage feeling something words couldn't hold. Maybe pride. Maybe just relief. Tiffany faded from the radar. Sometimes I still see her walking an anxious poodle, avoiding eye contact. They say she tried starting a parallel improvement committee, but no one paid attention. I moved forward, got more involved, helped, with a new firefighter drill, suggested an emergency valve out of the HOA's reach. Today, the original gate still stands, with its modern lock and a deep scratch left by Tiffany's old padlock. I pass it every day. And I always think, a chain nearly burned us down. But it was that, along with some courage, an old Jeep, and neighbors who finally heard each other, that saved us. So what did you think? A gate, a stubborn neighbor, and a fire that changed everything. Ever been through something like this? Ever had a Tiffany in your way? Tell me in the comments, and if you like this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next one.